Brandon Thurston did some great reporting this week on Post Wrestling having to do with Vince McMahon's return to WWE after his initial quote-unquote retirement in 2022, the Endeavor merger, who knew what and when. This is all as it relates to the ongoing WWE shareholder lawsuit, which is now in the latter stages of the discovery phase, which is how we can now see all of this information and how all of these documents were able to be obtained. I would say that it's pretty powerful stuff, and it is, except we already had a good sense of some of the shit that was going on when it came to Vince coming back to the company a few years ago. This is more about confirming our suspicions than anything else. It doesn't take away from the work that Brandon did on this. It's very in-depth, and until now, nobody has been able to put the pieces together publicly like this. You know, the key is that there is evidence to suggest that key executives from Endeavor, who now head up TKO, had a good sense that they were getting the company the very day that Vince McMahon announced his sudden retirement in July of 2022. And in the lawsuit, the shareholders allege that McMahon breached his fiduciary duties by steering the sale process in a way that protected his own interests in keeping power within WWE rather than taking the deal that would best maximize value for the stockholders. And other defendants in the suit, including Nick Khan, Paul Levesque, and former WWE executives and board members George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, they have all been accused of aiding or acquiescing in the alleged scheme. So the story includes lots of text messages, even one sent within hours of McMahon stepping away, sent by Mark Shapiro, now the president of TKO, to other executives at Endeavor, where Shapiro outlined this scenario. And tell me if this sounds familiar. He said, Nick and Stephanie are going to take over the WWE for the next 9 months, referring to Nick Khan and Stephanie McMahon, who did become co-CEOs that very same day. He said, Vince will be back with a new board, or he will take the company private, or he will sell it / coming to us. The race is on. The courtship is on. Man, I should let this guy pick the Powerball numbers for me. That's pretty damn close to what ended up actually happening, only it didn't take Vince 9 months to work his way back onto the board. It took 6. But the story says McMahon returned to WWE by reinstating himself onto the board of directors, using his superior voting power as controlling shareholder. McMahon removed several directors, some resigned, and he added 2 others besides himself. Immediately upon his return, WWE announced that it was exploring strategic alternatives, meaning the company was for sale. 3 months after exploring these alternatives, WWE agreed to merge with Endeavor's UFC business, creating the parent holding company now known as TKO. The filings also show communication between McMahon and Ari Emanuel throughout the latter part of 2022, when McMahon was ostensibly in exile and before WWE was formally put up for sale. Plaintiffs in the suit contend that McMahon and Emanuel had a friendship that assured McMahon would stay with the company post-transaction, whereas other potential suitors would have required him to leave WWE permanently. The filings do not explain how Shapiro, on the day of McMahon's retirement, appeared so confident that McMahon would soon return, possibly overhaul the board, and either sell the company or take it private. Less than 2 weeks after McMahon left the company, records show Emanuel and McMahon arranging an in-person meeting at a steakhouse in New York on August 10th. McMahon said he would bring along with him WWE's then co-CEOs, Stephanie McMahon and Nick Khan. At that point, McMahon had no formal role at WWE, but he continued to be the company's largest and controlling shareholder. His only formal power during this time was voting control. However, that entailed that any company sale or merger would require his support. And the plaintiffs claimed the sale process was slanted in a foregone conclusion and was not a genuine effort to determine WWE's full value, thus financially harming investors. Securing McMahon's personal future with the company he had just returned to, they allege, was put above making the most valuable deal for investors. 8 days after they seemingly met for lunch, on August 18th, Emanuel sent McMahon a series of messages, including a few links to TikTok videos and an apparent invitation for special access to a Bill Burr comedy show at Fenway Park. Records indicate Emanuel then sent McMahon multiple voice messages, What he said to McMahon in those memos is not public record. The Endeavor super agent then sent McMahon a download link, the contents of which are also unknown. But Emmanuel followed up with a striking text that suggests they might have been discussing something other than stand-up comedy when he said, "I will be your greatest partner." And as the sale process unfolded in early 2023, it drew interest from multiple potential bidders, including private equity firm KKR and Formula One owner Liberty Media. But recent deposition testimony from Ted Oberwager, a partner at KKR, and other court records indicate the firm's bid did not fully develop before WWE and Endeavor made their deal. Oberwager testified that KKR did not complete its diligence on buying WWE, did not submit a second-round bid, and never reached a point where it finalized the price or quantified potential synergies for a joint KKR-Liberty acquisition of WWE. He said KKR did not finish our work and never obtained sufficient information to establish a final reserve or walkaway price. After WWE and Endeavor announced the deal on April 3rd, 2023, senior executives at Liberty Media privately contradicted that the process was competitive. Liberty's then president and CEO, Greg Maffei, and a senior managing director at investment firm Blackstone, Joseph Barata, exchanged emails. "Looks like they've been cooking this one up for a while," Barata wrote, sharing a link to a news article about the deal. "Yup, pre-wired," Maffei replied. Maffei did not elaborate, but his comment can be read as expressing that much of the transaction was already in place before the formal process began. And the story's a lot longer. I'm not reading through the entire story, but those are some of the key points. Look, from day one, you had to be skeptical that Vince McMahon would stay away. And I said it when word started spreading about him trying to force his way back onto the board later in 22. He never actually retired so much as he spent those 6 months plotting his return. Vince McMahon was never going to voluntarily step aside and go take up a new hobby or spend more time hanging out with his grandkids. You know, if the Wall Street Journal story never dropped and the Janelle Grant sex trafficking lawsuit was never filed, he would have died in that chair at Gorilla one day. Like Maxine Dupree would walk back through the curtain on Raw one night and would find him face down on the desk with his headset on. The man is a workaholic. He doesn't have an off switch when it comes to this stuff. He spent 6 months laying low and plotting his comeback. And it's not far-fetched to think that he engineered the deal with Endeavor specifically because he knew that his friend Ari would keep him in a position of power. And if you watch that CNBC interview with the two of them after the deal was announced, you know, with Vince with his evil villain mustache, Ari specifically said like the deal was contingent on Vince being involved. He wanted him involved in the deal. He was practically swooning over the man. And Vince McMahon would still be there today, were it not for the Janelle Grant suit. Because it was only when there was a threat of a sponsor boycott that they took action to get him out of there. The minute Slim Jim paused their relationship with WWE, this was right before the Royal Rumble, they had no choice but to cut all ties with that man. And Vince knew enough that it could severely damage the company, so he went along with it. I don't believe that the two sides having communications with one another, you know, in advance of the deal is in and of itself illegal in any way. Unless the plaintiffs can prove that, in fact, the die was already cast and there was an understanding that Endeavor was getting it, you know, and nobody else was. In which case, if this thing goes to trial and they find in favor of the shareholders, you know, it's a civil case. So there could be a lot of money paid out in damages. But I doubt this thing ever even goes to trial. You know, right now there is a trial date scheduled for June. But WWE has settled lawsuits before to make them go away. I don't see this one being any different. Financial damages is all we're really talking about here, though. No one is going to jail, and you know the merger cannot be undone. But there was another interesting text exchange that was shared in the story as it relates to Vince's involvement in WWE creative. During the period in which Nick Khan claimed publicly that he was not involved in creative, he very clearly was. I think we already knew that, but this message confirms it. It was March of 2023. When Khan told CNBC in response to a question about Vince becoming more involved in the creative process. His answer was no. No is the answer to that. Well, let's take it back a month earlier to February 28th. 2023. Vince McMahon texted Triple H and Bruce Pritchard. Said, "Hey guys, just double checking. Does Roman and Cody know the new creative regarding WrestleMania and next year?" And Bruce responds, "Not to my knowledge. I don't know if Paul has had a conversation with either. Roman's first appearance since we spoke is Friday in DC. Both will be there in person." Nick Khan then responded to McMahon cryptically, writing Langus, to which Vince responded, and this was actually very funny. "What in the blue hell is Langus? LOL." And Khan replied, "Read it backwards." Langus read backwards is Signal. Signal is a private messaging app that has an auto-delete function for messages after a set period of time. I don't know why creative discussions would need to take place in Signal, but evidently Khan thought that it was important to take the conversation over there. I guess this is why. Yes, Vince McMahon was still involved in WWE creative in 2023. In fact, if I remember, he was even back at the gorilla position for night 2 of WrestleMania that year. I don't know if he was in the chair with the headset on or if he was just standing there directing traffic, but he was there in the flesh. And he was also the one behind Edge beating Finn Balor in their Hell in a Cell match. Supposedly Balor was supposed to win that match. But it was Vince who wanted Edge to win, and so he got what he wanted. And he also ruined the Raw after WrestleMania show that year by blowing up the show at the last minute and rewriting things. That was the night that Cody Rhodes and Brock Lesnar, they were supposed to tag up in the main event. But Lesnar attacked Cody instead and kicked off their feud. And we also got an Omos match that night with Elias. This was coming off an Omos match at WrestleMania with Brock Lesnar. It reeked of Vince. Like, you can count on one hand the number of matches that Triple H has booked Omos in on TV since then and still have fingers left over. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. Now Omos is in AAA with Vikingo. Like, he's been exiled over there as far away from the main roster as possible. But Fightful at the time said Vince was like the Tasmanian devil that night on Raw. He was running in, eating the script, ruining the show, and then leaving. But the creative with Roman and Cody, here's the deal with that. Originally, according to Dave Meltzer, Cody Rhodes was going to win the title in their first match at WrestleMania 39. But it was Roman Reigns, and I'm sure with Paul Heyman, who went to Vince to convince him that Roman should win. Roman went to Vince to tell him that Roman should win. And instead, they should hold off on Cody winning the title for another year, until 40 in Philadelphia, because it would mean more. Which is a nice idea, and it was a big moment. I don't think anybody can deny that. It paid off well in the end, but it almost didn't even happen. Because by putting it off, Cody almost got double fucked out of his moment when The Rock decided that he was finally ready to get back in the ring after all these years. They had Cody Rhodes win the Royal Rumble a second time, only to give his WrestleMania match up to The Rock on SmackDown, in truly one of the most bizarre creative decisions ever made. Like, the way that all played out on television is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. It came off so badly. And the fans revolted. Rock could see it. And to his credit, he decided to switch things up because the last thing he wanted was people shitting all over what might have been his final match. And out of that, we got the final boss character and the Avengers Endgame finish at WrestleMania. So it all worked out in the end. Eerily similar, the situations with WrestleMania 30 and WrestleMania 40. Where the great storybook ending almost didn't happen, but for the fans rising up. And with Daniel Bryan, CM Punk walking out also had a lot to do with it. But in the end, at 30 and 40, we got the right finish for the story in each case. So I can't wait to see what dumb shit decision they make to try to screw up the next big story at WrestleMania 50. But the story says the shareholders suing are less concerned with McMahon's involvement in creative and more concerned about Nick Khan directing discussions to Signal. And they allege that key communications on Signal were not properly preserved, possibly circumventing special preservation measures required during mergers and acquisitions. And if messages were not properly maintained, it could weigh into the lawsuit's outcome. So they have asked the court to order Khan, Ari Emanuel, Stephanie McMahon, and former WWE executive and Vince McMahon aide Brad Blum to sit down with attorneys and take screenshots of any relevant messages that they have on devices on which they used Signal. So this will not be the last we hear about this lawsuit. Again, there is a trial date scheduled for June. My prediction, either there'll be some sort of delay or there will be a settlement reached, but there will be no trial come June.